What's going on, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend in God's Unchained's ranked event. This week's video is going to be a little different than normal. As the professor commented last week, the meta seems pretty much solved. And also, just now that we're on the professor, he also makes a great weekend ranked themed content on his channel. I'm going to put a link to his YouTube channel in the description of this one. It's like his Mythic Monday meta breakdown video. It talks about like all the best decks from like the past week, like how many war decks got in the top 20, how many nature decks, how irrelevant is light. So if you care about weekend ranked information, which presumably you do since you're watching this video, if you watch the professor's video as well as this video, it's really like all the information you could possibly have, for your weekend ranked play. But getting back to it, so the meta is pretty much solved. All the top tier decks from like last week, the week before, 3 weeks ago, they're all the same top tier decks as now. So instead of gushing about board wipe death for like 5 minutes, we'll just like gloss over that. We're not even going to discuss any light list this week because the goal of this video is to give you all the best possible strategies you can have for your weekend ranked run, and the best strategies just don't involve light at the moment. So our main focus this week is we're gonna show off some nature and war decks, budget as well as expensive, and then all of our gods that aren't nature and war, we're gonna talk about them in relation to the nature and war matchup, because nature and war are just by far the two most popular gods. So the majority of your run will be against nature and war, and then all the other domains will just sort of be like peppered in. You're probably gonna get like 12 nature games, 8 war games, and then like 5 of all the other gods. So the nature and war matchups are the most important ones. That's what we're going to focus on this week. But before we jump into any of the lists, let's just do a quick little mini breakdown of all the most popular archetypes for each god. So obviously we got nature, the most popular god. That's generally aggressive mid-range nature. War can go two ways, either like very aggressive Slayer war or like mid-range control war. Mid-range control war is definitely better. It's in my opinion, it's the best archetype floating around right now, but it's much more expensive than like Slayer War, so it's less prevalent in the meta. So you'll mostly be seeing aggressive Slayer War. Magic is usually like tempo spell magic. Deception is usually like aggressive hidden rush ordery deception, but it could be sleep deception or like mid-range control. For death, similar to war, death's best archetype is board wipe death, but that's a very expensive archetype, so you'll mainly be seeing like zombie death and maybe like some zombie zoo hybrid stuff, and if you do happen to run into light, they will be zoo light. So now that we've done this like brief little overview of the meta, let's jump into our first deck list. Alright, so the first archetype we're going to talk about is board wipe death. We're going to run through this very quickly. So if you just recently picked up the cards for Board Wipe Death and you want a more in-depth analysis of this archetype, check out last week's video. I'm going to put a link to last week's video in the description of this video. We're going to go over it in way more detail last week. This is the same general Board Wipe Death deck that we've been seeing for the past like year in Gods Unchained. It has some ramp, it has sleep mechanics to stall, it has very efficient board clears, and then big expensive 9-mana creatures to kill your opponent with. It's a super powerful deck. If you own the cards for Board Wipe Death, it's definitely a strong pick for your weekend ranked run. People always perform well with Board Wipe Death since the beginning of time, and that is not going to change anytime soon. So this deck made by Moonblack has been performing really well this week. If you're thinking about like what exact list to run for your Board Wipe Death run, this one seems to be fine. But no matter what you do for Board Wipe Death, you're going to be performing relatively well. And yeah, that's about it for this archetype. Let's jump into the next one. Alright, and before we get into the tired old like nature and war decks, let's talk about deception. Because I said the meta was solved in the beginning of the video, but this is a spicy new deception deck. We got Atlantian deception over here. It's been a long time since Atlantian deception was in the meta. A lot of players have been experimenting with this the past week. This list in particular was made by Mirage88. He has a very small sample size of games right now. He's played 7 games, 100% win rate. And yeah, so this is definitely a fun, strong new archetype, and I think it has pretty decent game against both like aggressive Slayer War and aggressive mid-range nature, which is the most important thing to remember when picking your decks for the weekend ranked run. So we got lots of decent early game creatures in here. Obviously, there's Pyramid Wardens. He's got a ton of stats. We got like Switch Duelists and Armor Lurkers that are really good for making those early game trades. Hollows in here for like value generation. Counterfeit could be really good for denying your war opponent's card sweep or stealing your nature opponent's like Jagstaff, something like that. Let's see. And then we have our Atlanteans in here. Rolling Watcher, who's obviously super badass. And Boost Walker to buff up your Atlanteans, give them Twin Strike, make it so they can take lots of value trades. It just seems like this is the type of deck that can fight for board like very evenly with like both nature or aggressive war, and then with cards like Boost Walker to buff up those Atlanteans so they can get better trades. I think you can totally beat them, like on the board state, and then with cards like Shade Walker in here, who just snowballs every single turn. You can play Shade Walker, go face, hide him with Orpheo's Distraction, and just keep going face. With this type of card, you could totally outrace a Slayer War deck, and Slayer War is really hard to race against. So you could be going even in the early game, and then decide to flip the switch and just play Shade Walker, go face, maybe get a Boost Walker in the mix, buff your Shade Walker up even more, go even more face. Let's see, Mirage has a Crushed Construct in here, which he's a big beat stick creature. I've been seeing a lot of like Rapture Dances, like single copies of Rapture Dance in these Atlantean Deception decks, which might be better for your weekend ranked run, considering Nature's the most popular god. Nature's got Falling Stars and Blade Flies, so they go wide a lot. So Rapture Dance might be smarter than just a big beefy creature, but whatever you go with, it should be fine. Let's see, Lantern-Bound Fae is really good for destroying Black Jaguars, Crystal Stags, like maybe an Oddie after you pop the Protected when you're playing against war, so that's always decent. Let's see, we got Orpheo. Orpheo's great in those like early curve, like tempo matchups. You just play Pyramid Warden on turn 1, you get your bonus Orpheo, and then you get to destroy your opponents like Black Jaguar for free. Let's see, we got the Dark Knives in here, which can pair with any of your early game creatures for lots of damage. It can also pair with your Guild Enforcer, so that you make your Guild Enforcer 6 attack. The 1 armor makes it so you can Orpheos distract him every single turn and just race your opponent. Like all in all, this seems like a fresh new take on like aggressive deception. Like I said, I think it could totally hang against both war and nature. So if you like deception, if you want something a little new, this could totally be a great list to go with. Alright, now let's talk about our most popular god, which is nature. I've got 2 different nature decks for you, an expensive version and then a budget version. We're going to start off with the expensive variant, similar to the board wipe death analysis. I'm going to go over this a bit faster than I normally do because this is the same like mid-rangey nature deck that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. There is one very interesting thing about this deck that caught my eye and probably caught yours as well, is there are 2 copies of Demogorgon here, and that's fairly uncommon for this style of nature deck. And this nature deck made by Mr. I don't know, this is his name, it's a great name, I'm not going to try it. This has been one of the better performing nature decks this weekend, this week. And if you look at his list, it's very, very standard. The only takeaway is it seems like this guy, he saw that Giant Pangolin got nerfed. He removed his 2 copies of Giant Pangolin, and then with some genius God's Unchained logic, he said, I need to throw 2 cards in my deck. Might as well put in Demogorgons, and it's been working for him. And it makes a lot of sense. Like we've been saying, like Slayer War and fast, aggressive nature decks are the most common decks right now. So if you can stick a demo against those high octane fast decks, then you usually win. So why not throw 2 demos into your nature deck? But besides that, what we normally see, you've got your good early game creatures. You buff them up with your low hanging fruits, your Chirons. You got your great 2-mana cards, your Underbrush Boars, your Fey Flame Blades, your Canopy Barrages, your single target removal. Selena gets rid of your Confused. Moose is big. Falling Stars is great. We talk about that every week. Jagstaff has become more popular now that Finny and Fruitbearer got nerfed. And then, you got the Hunt in there. So it's, very standard nature deck that we've been seeing for the past couple of weeks. This guy put 2 demos in there. Seems like a great list. But now let's jump into the budget variation. So this is aggressive mid-range nature deck for under $69. I recently made a budget deck video talking about this deck, talking about a war deck and a deception deck. I'm going to put that deck or that video in the description of this video. It'll give you a ton of detail about, all three of these budget decks and, as well as some gameplay footage, all that, blah, blah, blah. But same general game plan as the expensive deck we just went over. You've got your, strong early game creatures, your wild hogs, those same marsh walkers and black jaguars. No Chiron in here, but you can still buff them up with your low-hanging fruits. You still got your decent early game removal cards with your Canopy Barrage, your Fey Flame Blade, Crystal Stag. We talk about him every week. He's solid. He gets you stuff. Blessed is good. We've got some nice budget creatures. Rabid Bear has decent stats. He's great at value trading against your opposing black jaguars, which will be very common this weekend. Starving Sabertooth is just another decent creature. It's also important to note that both these budget guys, they're wild, so they get buffed up nicely by Wildfire. Let's see, we've got Veil Ward Minotaur in here, who's like, a budget variation of something like an Avatar of War, or, like an expensive 5-mana card like Jagstaff. Just decent stats, good for taking some trades, might heal you up a little bit, might get you some resources. Giant Pangolin, he got nerfed a couple weeks ago. He's still great. Still has 6 attack, which is good for killing your opponent. Blitz makes him, immediately impactful. Armor is still relevant, relatively hard to remove. And, the hunt is still as self-explanatory as ever. So, yeah, if you want more information about this deck, I'd highly recommend watching the budget deck video in the description. It goes into a lot of detail. But, yeah, that is it for nature, and let's jump on into war. Alright, so now let's move on to war. Just like with nature, I've got an expensive deck as well as a budget deck. We're going to start off with the expensive version first. This is the same mid-range control list we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. This is the list that I ran last week. It went well, 23 out of 25 games. And it's good for all the same reasons it's been good in the past. They have, very decent early game creatures, tons and tons of, blitz as well as relics to, control your opponent's early board state. Like we've been saying, most of your matchups are going to be against, like, aggressive nature or, like, aggressive war. And all of those little early game blitz creatures and relics are really good for just slowing down their board state. And by the time they're like running low on resources, that's when you drop your demos and your Hectors, and you have your big where's the Grand Hall? You have your big Grand Hall turns, you heal up to full, and your aggressive tempo oriented opponents just never really stand a chance. Mid-range control war, it's been really good for the past couple of weeks. It's going to keep being really good. They got good early game creatures. They have great removal. They have great healing. They have great AoE board clears. Like it's just a great archetype. So if you've got the collection to make a mid-range control war deck, you will definitely do well. Mid-range control war has been performing well for the past couple of weeks. Definitely top tier. And just like with the other list we've been talking about this week, if you want more information about these archetypes, check out last week's video. Check out 2 weeks ago's videos. We've been talking about this for a while. But let's jump into the more budget-friendly war variant. Just like with the budget nature deck, I have a YouTube video. It's going to be in the description of this video. Tons of detail on this list. This is not control-y mid-range war. This is very fast, aggressive Slayer war. This deck hits really hard, really fast. It's got a lot of creature buffs, a lot of early game stuff. So your game plan with this deck is to establish your board state very quickly. As you can see, we've got lots of 1 and 2 mana creatures floating around in here, so you can fill up your board as early as turn 1. We've got some relics that are great for destroying black jaguars and celestial stags. With all these early game creatures, you're definitely going to have something alive on turn 3, 4, or 5 that you can hit with in another round, or a red fume serum. Then we've got those same blitz creatures that are so good for controlling the board state, which is super important since like decks like this, aggressive Slayer war as well as aggressive nature, are the 2 most common archetypes in the meta. And then like the one thing that I would like to highlight specifically is Grand Hall. Grand Hall is the card that separates this list from your opposing Slayer war and aggressive nature opponents, right? So you're going to be fighting for the board state, in most of your matchups, whether it be against mirror matches of war or against nature. So you're going to be relatively even on the board. You're going to probably be even on life total. And the turn where you play Grand Hall is going to be the turn where you win the game. because it's going to make it so your existing board is stronger than it was initially, so it'll either take better trades than it would have before, or it'll just deal more damage to your opponent, and all that damage you deal will, it has leech, so, you'll heal up. So if you were relatively even before, your board got bigger, so now you're ahead on the board state, you gained a lot of life, so now you have a health total advantage, and then like the icing on the cake is the Grand Hall himself. It's a 3/5 with frontline. So if your opponent wants to get rid of your, big skeleton heavies and whatnot, they have to get through this Grand Hall first, so they have to waste resources on that, healing you in the process most likely, and then they can work on, destroying your board state. But the fact of the matter is, Grand Hall swings the game into your favor, like, in a big way, buffs up all your stuff, and just makes it so, like, you are safe from your opponent killing you. Like, if you happen to play Magic over this weekend, like, if they've been, like, throwing Worm Breath at your face, trying to set up for, like, their last big hit from, like, a Monolith of the Storms, like, Grand Hall will just deny that from happening. Or, just like if your nature opponent's been chipping you down, you're at like 15, you're starting to get scared, you play Grand Hall, you go back up to 25, and now they don't have a chance. Grand Hall it's one of the more expensive, it's the most expensive card in this deck. It is under $69, so that's nice. But yeah, if you have Grand Hall, if you're thinking about getting Grand Hall will definitely win you a lot of games that you would have lost otherwise. But yeah, like I said, check out that budget YouTube video for more information, for some gameplay footage. And this deck's really fun, definitely doesn't break the bank, and if you like war, this is a great list for you. Now we are on to the last archetype we're going to talk about today, which is Tempo Magic. And before we go into anything, as you can see, GUDecks.com has recently dubbed this deck Card Draw Magic Deck. And I think as a community, we will not stand for this. That's not a very fun or intimidating name. Like, yeah, this deck has a lot of card draw, but when you play as or against this deck, you're not, ending the game thinking, man, I drew a lot of cards. You're thinking, like, I did cool spell boost stuff, or man, like that Oni popped off, or like my Monolith did something. So I think we can come up with a more intimidating name than Card Draw Magic the deck. So that rant is over. This is a very similar Tempo Magic deck that we've been seeing, for a while. I like this deck in particular because it's got the Crystal Rain in here, which is really good against nature. And, like we've been saying this whole video, nature is going to be really popular. Crystal Rain just single-handedly deals with Blade Flies, as well as, Falling Star Badgers. It's decent against war. War decks tend to go wide as well. We've also got, 2 copies of Valve Learning in here. Valve Learning is a super good card, although it's not in every Tempo Magic deck, but also really good against nature and war with some of your spell boost help with your Street Conjure. This also can deal with most of a Blade Fly or a Falling Star. It's just really convenient board control tool. It can also give like your Oni or your Miraculous Familiar like protected or something, or your Monolith protected and ward. It's got lots of use cases no matter where you are in the game state. And it's good for, all the same reasons as last week. Got lots of card draw, as the name would suggest. That being said, he does only have 1 copy of All-Seeing Spire, so is it really card draw magic? Which is interesting. Like I said, he's got the tech cards in here, like the Crystal Rain and the Double Vows of Learning. Personally, I think you want to go 2 copies of All-Seeing Spire, considering war is very, very popular, and war has a really hard time dealing with All-Seeing Spire, but I can understand, getting rid of it, just mulligan even harder for your Palace's Wand. But, one important thing to note about, Tempo or Card Draw Magic, the deck, it's one of the few archetypes that's, like, actually pretty good against mid-range Control War. It doesn't just auto-win, obviously. If your mid-range Control War opponent is very conservative about all of their, like, healing resources, they can still beat you. But because you have, some of this order stuff like your All-Seeing Spire and your Monolith, War has a really hard time interacting with those cards. Getting your, like, Oni protected or behind a front line is very difficult for War to deal with, because they're using all Blitz stuff. Oni's very easy for War to kill unless it's protected. You gotta keep that in mind. But, it's mainly the order stuff. Your Demetrios is probably gonna get his full final draft up against, mid-range Control War. You're gonna get tons of cards off your All-Seeing Spire. Monolith will be really hard to answer. So this is one of the few archetypes that can actually hold its own against that, like, mid-range Control War. And then, against Nature or Slayer War, it's just pretty good. Lots of great early game control cards, you know, like your bolts, get rid of like pretty much all their creatures. Flying Carpet's decent for you know, taking some trades. Ancient Tech's good for taking trades, you know, you get the picture. You got your Assistant Alchemist for some like high impact early game combos and stuff like that. Scepter of Artistry can make for some like crazy board clears with your tracking bolts or those, you know, aforementioned crystal rains. You know, essentially speaking, Tempo Magic has been really strong for the past couple of weeks. It's still strong. It's good against Nature End War, particularly against like mid-range Control War, which I think is currently the best deck in the meta. So if you are a fan of Magic, then check out, or then definitely, you know, go with a list like this one. Alright, so now that we talked about the meta, we went over the list, we did all the thinking. What is the conclusion? What should we play this weekend in the ranked event? Well, in my opinion, it's one of the war variants. Like I said, I think that mid-range Control War is the best archetype in the game right now. That, in my opinion, is the best deck. I also think like the budget fast, like Slayer War, you know, type of deck is also good. But whatever deck you go with, make sure you have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!